Welcome to my new Dragon Queen Reboot update video. In this video, I'm just going to give you a reading of the Reboot update chapter 1. That way you can kind of see what direction I'm sort of going with it. Now, this is a very heavily work in progress writing sample, so there will probably be a lot of edits to it in the future, but I just wanted to give you guys a rough idea of what I'm working on and what it's like so far. So here we go. Chapter 1. Lake of Gold. Princess Aelwyn felt like she'd been split in two. One half was a perfect, talented royal daughter going about her assigned duties for event preparation, and the other a snapping, broiling beast of stress and anger ready to burst forth at any moment. She'd found that setting up for the Festival of Gold was a rather daunting task. Though she'd relished the chance to lead the planning in order to prove her responsible demeanor wasn't just a front, now it turned out to be, indeed, almost too much for her to handle. The holiday would be a month-long massive celebration honoring the high god Canaan and his coven of witches, the highest of which being Aelwyn's mother, Queen Lyriel. The weeks would be filled with lively music, mesmerizing dancing, rich food, copious amounts of drinking, lavish parties, and of course, the centerpiece of it all, the Lake of the Golden God. It was a massive pit of liquid gold, in which, at the end of the weeks of feasting, every citizen of capital Canor would throw in an object that mattered dearly to them, sacrificing it to Canaan. These objects could vary wildly. Aelwyn once heard that in olden days women would throw their children into the pot in order to receive more of the god's power. She was glad she'd never seen that happen. However, during the last festival, which was 10 years ago when she was 9, a man had been caught stealing Queen Lyriel's wand staff. For an attempt at thieving away such an utterly sacred and divine object, his wife was forced by societal standards to be the one to throw him into the pit. His screams didn't last long, but they still rang in Aelwyn's ears these years later. Shaking off the memory with a shudder, Aelwyn promised to herself that something so terrible wouldn't happen this time. Her mother had entrusted her to make this festival the most grand she'd ever seen, and Aelwyn knew that Lyriel must have seen over 20 or so festivals in her hundreds of years of being queen. Today, Aelwyn's tiny heels snapped against polished tiles as she made her way through the castle from the kitchen to the throne room. The Lake of the Golden God was located there, though normally covered by a magical barrier preventing knights from cooking alive in their armor when standing at attention by the queen's side. Aelwyn tapped her quill to the notebook in her hands, the rough parchment pages stuffed with notes, receipts, and long lists. Her braided brown hair framed a pale round face with large hazel green eyes. Today she wore a basil green dress with a blue one layered underneath, the long flowing sleeves gracing her arms, traditional of an Evanoran royal. Rays of purple and gold-tinted light shone through the triangular stained-glass windows lining the castle hallway, causing the amethysts lining Aelwyn's tiara to glisten. Her strides were confident, yet her posture terrible as she hunched over the notebook, scribbling various things to remind herself of later. Normally all of her to-do lists were mentally kept, and tidy at that, but desperate times led to the need to pull out a journal and quill. Aelwyn had thrown herself into her duties that week as if all her free time were a sacrifice to the lake. She made lists of famous human chefs to hire in the royal kitchen, contacted the best sphinx and dancing troupes money could buy, purchased hundreds of barrels of Datar-made wine, requested 100 kitsune to provide magical energy to the witches, and spent a good chunk of the royal budget on supplies for the royal parade carriage, which would be crafted by master woodworker satyrs. She didn't have to do all of this by herself, but she felt the need to handle as much of it as she could in order to make sure it was done correctly. Already she'd lost valuable time dealing with the stable master's mistake of trying to bridle a centaur while his veins were perhaps almost entirely flowing with beer. The offended upper-class centaur had been petitioning for the man's firing for the past few days, and Aelwyn had been the one to try to calm her down. Convincing a centaur to revoke her offenses, she'd found, took many, many compliments and even a bit of bribery. As she continued her walk along the halls, she passed a group of knights in gleaming indigo armor escorting a wood nymph interior decorator who had come all the way from Windbreath City. Aelwyn tried to remember her name, beads of sweat lacing her brow when she realized she'd forgotten it, even though she'd been the one to hire the woman. The nymph smiled, raising a bark-gloved hand blooming with cherry blossoms. "Greetings, Aelwyn Cainaron, Princess of Evenor, Mistress of Pegasi, Tamer of Griffins, Daughter of Lyriel, Archer—" Damn it, she's even using my full title. "Greetings to you as well," Aelwyn replied, rushing past. She had tried to make it look like she was in a hurry so as not to face the familiar, utter embarrassment of not responding to a greeting using her name and full title with their own. Instead, she opted for the rudeness of not stopping to curtsy. She continued down the hallway to the grand entrance hall, a massive room with a set of gold-lacquered wooden doors on one end that stretched up to the 3-story-high ceiling and a grand staircase on the other. Light filtered down from the stained-glass roof onto the carved tiles below, which depicted a stylized map of Evenor complete with large gems marking out major cities and veins of gold acting as rivers and lakes. The hall was bustling with life as always. Lords and ladies, maids and butlers, guests and workers alike twittered amongst one another. Aelwyn smoothed down her hair as she entered, stray strands escaping the confinement of her braids as if in a rebellious plot to make her look as frazzled as possible in front of her court. Those who saw her bowed and curtsied in respect as she passed, all save for her Sphinxan chambermaid Mirsha, who strode up to Aelwyn in a hurry and walked alongside her on her 2 lion-like legs while handling a few parchments of her own.
"Princess, you're finally here? I sent a fairy hours ago."
Mirsha's fur-tipped tail flicked in annoyance. Aelwyn sighed. "I know. I apologize. I forgot to send her back to you. I was in the middle of dealing with the menu for the second week's ballroom dinner." A band of centaur actors trotted up to Aelwyn, their faces coated in various paints and hair lathered in sweet-smelling creams. Bells were tied around their hocks, which made little jingling noises punctuated by their hooves clopping. The lead actor bowed. "Ah, Princess Aelwyn of Evenor. We've been rehearsing all day and are in need of a royal bathhouse. Can't have actors tromping around in sweaty costumes before the court," he laughed. Aelwyn's voice dropped to a deadpan. "The royal bathhouse is reserved for members of the family. I'm afraid I'll have to recommend you to the castle washroom, where most everyone else here cleans themselves." The actor retorted with a slight pout, raising his hand to his chest in mock offense. "Since you'd invited us all the way here and made us work so hard, I suppose we were just expecting treatment befitting of our talent, of what we're bringing to the rich culture of this event." Mirsha bared her fangs at him, pointing at his velvet-draped chest with a clawed finger.
"Hush now! Her Highness is busy with the Queen's matters. Don't bother her with such trite. Find a maid to clean your rump. Off with ya!"
She shooed away the miffed troop to Aelwyn's silent relief. "Thank you, Mirsha," she whispered with a small smile. "Oh, trust me, they won't be getting away with that, badgering the princess about the washroom. Ugh. You shouldn't be deigning to even speak with them." Mirsha gave a huff before nervously tapping her paw on the floor in a particular pattern. She'd gotten the habit, as well as her accent, from how she'd been raised. Normally Sphinxan folk lived in the deserts of southern Evenor, but Mirsha was a rare case, adopted by a satyr couple living in Gardnopf Swamp. As such, she had a rather forward, no-nonsense demeanor typical of those raised in the culture. No need, Mirsha. It's all right, really," Aelwyn said, not wanting to have to deal with a herd of angry centaur.
"Listen, Highness, if you're going to be leading this horde of jesters, you'd best be learning how to be proper stern. Can't let 'em push you around when one word of yours could leave 'em lifeless. The more leeway you give 'em, the more they'll take." She waved her finger before Aelwyn's face. Aelwyn grinned. "And should I start by punishing you for not curtsying when you greeted me?" Mirsha clicked her tongue. "Ugh, don't get smart with me, girlie. I seen you in your wee knickers." The two had ascended the grand staircase and stood before the tinted glass door of the throne room. "Let's delve into your hypocrisy another time, shall we?" Aelwyn retorted, pressing her hand to a marked section of the door. It glowed with a magical light that, after a moment, spread to the rest of the door and caused the glass pieces to fold in on themselves in intricate patterns, leaving an opening large enough for Aelwyn and Mirsha to walk through. They emerged into perhaps the most elegant room of the castle,
Queen Lyriel's throne room spanned a great length, the bulk of which was taken up by the Lake of the Golden God. Molten gold bubbled beneath a shimmering magical barrier within the oval-shaped pit, which was made of craggy volcanic rock sunken into the ground. Beyond the edges of the pit, the floor was lined with perfectly carved ebony tiles inlaid with veins of lavender. The far end of the room had a tiered platform bearing the Queen's throne, a hulking structure with a backing in the shape of a roaring golden bear, the front legs of which formed the armrests. Its face was twisted into a roar, its claws razor-sharp. Flanking the throne were twin waterfalls of molten gold that flowed into the lake. A stained glass window, intermittently interrupted by columns, took up the entire back wall. Its finely painted surface, crafted of colorful pieces of glass, depicted a giant stylized Queen Lyriel lording over renditions of Evenor's peoples. Centaurs, deities, and wood nymphs galloped through wooded forests. Mermaids and sea nymphs swam in crystalline oceans. Dwarves and satyrs climbed high mountain peaks. Humans and kitsune strode through villages and towns. Fairies and harpies soared through the sunny skies, and sphinx and phaetars trudged through searing sands. Speaking of the Queen, she was standing before the steps up to the throne, her arms spread and eyes closed as she prayed over the lake. A long dress of deep purples and lavenders swept around her legs. A tall crown inlaid with the finest amethysts was atop her brow, from under which was long, wavy golden hair spilling down her back. Every so often, strands of her hair would spontaneously move as if brushed by an intangible breeze. These flicks of movement were the spirits constantly at the Queen's side, sent by Canaan to guard her and give her strength. While they were invisible to the naked eye, Éowyn could often feel their presence when she got close to her mother. Cold chills would go up her spine, and she could feel them crawling all over her skin, examining her and making sure she posed no threat before they retreated back to their mistress. Despite the specters that wove between her locks and slithered across her shoulders, Lyriel had a distinct taste for keeping her personal space undisturbed. Éowyn made sure to stand a few paces away before giving a low curtsy. She stayed in that position, head bowed and hands gripping her skirt, until Lyriel finished her incantation and opened her eyes. Her gaze seemed like it could burn, her pupils glowing a bright gold due to her status as a witch. Most lower-level witches had yellowish eyes, and the more golden they shone was an indication of their level of power. Since Lyriel was the most powerful witch ever known, it was as if her eyes contained the same molten metal writhing in the pool below. Her sharp face tilted toward Éowyn. A gentle smile graced her lips.
"Good afternoon, Éowyn. You may rise."
Éowyn quickly came to a stand. Formalities were no longer needed. "Hello, Mother! I'm here to prepare the lake." Éowyn let her enthusiasm shine through her face. Her internal self, however, attempted to squash her rising bout of anxiety. These next few minutes would prove vitally important, for both the festival and her future as queen. Lyriel clasped her hands before her. "You have read the manuscripts I gave you? Thoroughly?" "Yes, Mother. Multiple times." Lyriel gave a clipped, cheerful laugh. "I should have expected as much. You spend more time in the library than the cooks in the kitchen." Lyriel's voice always had a quiet serenity to it, as if she could put a manticore to sleep with a sentence alone. Yet there was a hard edge, that of resolve and pure power rippling within. "Well, that doesn't ring true for these past few months," Éowyn responded. "I've been traipsing around the city pulling this entire thing together by the seams." She gave a nod. "I trust you will be immensely satisfied." Internally, Éowyn felt her heart skip several beats whenever she thought of an errand she'd only half finished, or a dignitary she'd only just remembered she needed to talk to. She could sense Mirsha's doubting aura behind her. "Excellent." Lyriel began to pull her hands apart. Appearing between her palms was a length of gold. It was only once she'd spread her arms fully to either side that the entire span of her holy wand staff was complete. She grabbed it in one hand and offered it to Éowyn. "Show me that you can handle it." Éowyn trembled. The wand staff, named Antler of the Slain, was said to turn all those who touched it to shining statues, save for the Queen. It was the object with the strongest connection to High God Canaan in the world, and legend sung of how it had been forged from his golden fur and amethyst eyes. Throughout her entire life, Éowyn had been forbidden from magic. Lyriel had drawn her baby daughter's blood and used it to create a pact, one that would disallow the princess to even touch a wand without it flying from her hand. Éowyn had questioned this incessantly, and the only reasoning her mother had given was that magic was inherently dangerous and too risky for a royal heir to use until adulthood. Thus, Éowyn had watched in quiet seething while young palace witches practiced their craft in the gardens or within the alchemy labs. She'd been particularly hurt when one of her best childhood friends, a kitsune named Juhong, had been sent away to the other side of Evenor to be an assistant to a great witch. It was maddening. And yet, here she stood, after a lifetime of being unable to grasp a wand, with the most powerful one of all being handed to her. She looked up at Lyriel, her eyes glazing over. Lyriel's hair shimmered as her head lowered. "The pact has been broken. Take the antler and claim your place as heir." Éowyn slipped her fingers around the cool surface of the staff. She flinched, anticipating it to writhe away at her touch. Instead, she immediately felt a pulsing connection, as if the staff contained a beating heart whose vessels were now wrapping themselves around her soul. It had accepted her as princess. Éowyn could hear her breathing rise and fall, shallow breaths that caused her head to spin. She grasped for the lines of instruction she'd read from the manuscripts. She put her other hand on the wand and held it at an arm's length before her, pointing towards the lake. The various guards stationed in the room bowed their heads. Éowyn let the wand take energy from her body, her own spirit powering the spell. She spoke the incantation words meant to bless the lake and send all that it consumed into the maw of High God Canaan. Vesok yedev e charech, forse yedev e suma, desok devie e rakon, feros ye e vascofara, malakos, aria e deneas. Consume their desires, send their souls, give your power, bless our queen, curse Arya's children. Various beams of shimmering light shone from each amethyst on the wand. They bounced around the room in a show of jagged power before all meeting at the ceiling and uniting into a blinding circle of constructed, looping characters and ancient symbols. The disk of light spun as it lowered into the lake's surface and expanded to cover the whole golden expanse. The glowing symbols grew white-hot before dissipating in a flash of purple. It was done. The room fell silent. Éowyn's arms felt like weak twigs. They trembled as they held the staff, which felt like it had grown 10 times heavier. Her will couldn't keep her steady, and in the next moment she fell to her knees and pulled the staff to her chest, using it as a support. It took a moment for her to even process how incredibly exhausted she felt now, as if in an instant she'd climbed the entirety of Mount Maramak. Fat beads of sweat rolled down her face, and she found it increasingly hard to breathe, her lungs pulling in air through thick wheezes. It took all she had left to prop herself on the wand and not fall forward. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Her red-tinged eyes looked up to see the queen standing before her, a pleased smile on her face. Lyriel hardly ever touched her. Éowyn's breath caught, the crawling sensations of the spirits examining her barely able to repress her excitement. "I did it?" she asked through cracked lips. Lyriel nodded. The sensation of her silky dress brushing against Éowyn's skin felt nice. Comforting. It was hard to form a complex thought at the moment. Éowyn spotted Mirsha, her wrinkled face etched in concern, her body inching forward as if trying to get to Éowyn but being limited by the functions of formality. Lyriel put her fingers under Éowyn's chin and raised it, her golden eyes bored into her daughter's. "You did wonderfully. I will begin to teach you magic tomorrow. Rest well. I will send one of my kitsune to attend to you." She nodded at Mirsha, who rushed forward to collect Éowyn in her arms. All Éowyn was able to feel was the wand slipping from her fingers and the familiar warmth of Mirsha's body. She slipped in and out of consciousness, only vaguely aware of being taken through the servant tunnels, up a flight of stairs, and settled into the large, soft bed in her chambers. Mirsha's voice guided her into nonsense streams filled with blinding lights and distant, feral roars. Thank you all so much for watching. You can support these videos on Patreon, as well as support me by following me on Twitter and Instagram. I hope you really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun to work on. I am really excited to continue working on Dragon Queen, and I'll probably give you guys an update within the next month or two. Anyway, see ya!